Everybody, I'm here with Mark Kelkenberg, who is quickly becoming a good friend of, as Mike and Dave would say, the show. But for me personally, someone that I've been reaching out over the last couple of probably days, but really a week or so, right? With the 2024 Super Draft finally just happening, and surprisingly seeing the Philadelphia Union and Ernst Tanner use the picks and not trade them away or just pass. But let me introduce you all to Mark. Mark, how are you? And if you can just give us a little bit about your background and why you're so interested in collegiate soccer, which I find that fascinating and an awesome thing as well.
Yeah. So starting off, I'm just an individual contributor within the space. I think my coaching backgrounds. So I have a full time job, and most of my soccer stuff is just part time or just a hobby. And more specifically, I've really appreciated seeing a lot of the youth players around the country and then even abroad. So if I can find really good video on certain players, pretty much anywhere, typically in the Americas, but I've done a little bit of video scouting for European countries as well. And I don't know, I scour the internet. I try to find players that I really admire. I think their skills are really great. And then, if they don't have a video, I'll just put it together because, if I'm a fan of them, whatever I can do to kind of help their careers, even if I've never talked to them, I never meet them, that's fine with me. I'm just all about seeing really good players play for really good teams. And that's kind of the mission behind what I've been doing. So that kind of brings it into the college game, especially because obviously being Charlotte, North Carolina based, there's a wealth of college programs around this area alone. So being that connected really has helped a lot. And then, the video is getting better and better with like ESPN Plus,
Hmm.
um, broadcasting a lot of their games and being able to help these guys. And then the connection between NCAA and USL League Two is really fun. So if you ever go to a USL League Two game, depending on the team, like you could have a really good time. And then that's like where you kind of bridge the gap of, pro, semi pro, NCAA. And then you're into a good fandom of that level of play. So yeah, I mean, last year I kind of did a little bit of stuff behind the scenes in terms of MLS drafts with some of the NCAA guys. More so, just taking or working with a couple front offices to build out their list and kind of research, um, what some of the players had done over the summer in USL League Two, for example. Because, I mean, out of the 380 guys, it's very hard to watch all of them, and
Yes.
that's where it gets tricky. But yeah, since there's that connection between USL League Two and NCAA, that was kind of my intro to it all as well. And then yeah, this year I got more active in terms of as the season progressed and obviously started to end, I was able to produce more videos for guys leading up to the draft. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. I've talked to several of these guys personally, um, kind of about their ambitions and things like that. And really, and like we just it's a great thing about social media. You can talk to a bunch of different people and yeah, like it's it's just wild and it's been a blast. So it definitely helps with the enthusiasm as well. And it just even post draft, it still hasn't ended. So it's
No, and
definitely
it's probably not going to end for a little bit as we
yeah,
approach the preseason, especially very quickly with a team like the Philadelphia Union, just 65 days or 64 days away from their first match out in Costa Rica against Saprissa. So these
that'll be a
guys
good
gonna
one.
have to, yeah, it's gonna happen quick, and these guys gotta have to make a decision, right? And I know we'll touch on this topic a little bit later, but making a decision in terms of foregoing their eligibility with the NCAA or joining if the Philadelphia Union's interested in having them in the first team or even the second team right away. So, Mark, I think a good place to start is high level. what were your thoughts on the three picks that the Philadelphia Union made this year? Which, again, I cannot emphasize enough just how rare it is for the Philadelphia Union to actually use these picks. Never mind three of them. Sure, they got Trent Holden last year, as well as a Philadelphia Union 2 player last year. But to see them pick up Stas, Korzanowski, Zach Bohane, is that how you
Yeah.
would say? Okay. And Francesco Montali is, to me, an unbelievable turn of events, especially for the Philadelphia Union.
Yeah.
But your overall thoughts on the three picks that they made?
Yeah. So immediately after the draft, I just started looking at how each of the teams started like picking or just seeing what draft class they were bringing in. And I would say, as far as I'm concerned, just based on those three picks, I would give it a top 10 draft out of the rest of the teams. And then if we were talking about it earlier, if you bring in or you add in Nick Periano as, a pseudo part of that draft class just because he is a former college guy, uh, then you start creeping into the top five because I'm really high on each of those guys, to be honest. So that's kind of where I put it in terms of, look at what each team drafted and then my personal predictions on where do I see those guys in 2 to 3 years from now. And I would say, based on the group coming into the union, I would say top five. I mean, it's hard to beat Colorado and Salt Lake with the level of they had a ton of picks. You guys didn't have any first rounders. That makes it kind of difficult. Um, but yeah, I mean, really good company because there was a lot of great players in this draft, and there's a lot of opportunities to mess it up a little bit too. And I think Ernst and John Shear really did a great job. Um, but we can definitely get into more of the details of each of the players.
All right, so I think it probably makes the most sense to start from the very first pick that they made, which again was in the second round. In terms of Stas Korzanowski, which is a mouthful, but
Yeah.
a local guy in the way that he was at Penn. What are your thoughts on him ceiling? What can you see him doing outside of obviously having a gigantic frame at 6'4", 193 pounds?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a trend now, but you'd have to say that the Union like center forwards with a mouthful for a name. With Casper, his a couple seasons that were really good, but ultimately, like when I started to think about it a little bit more, I'm and is our Ernst Tanner and John Shear going after kind of like replacing guys from that team a couple years ago between Aronson and Shabilko. So that's kind of the premise for all of it. So obviously, like you said, huge target guy, just for me, prototype pro level athletic build. I mean, he looks like a freak. And I mean, when you put him up there with some of the other high level complete forwards, like Logan Farrington, Jason Trikuluk, Jacob Merrill, I think he's up there. And he's probably more athletic than them physically. But I mean, when you're talking about the top forwards and all the NCAA, you know, down year a little bit, but like I don't know. Even with that, if you just take his last two seasons, he's averaged a goal and goal or a goal involvement in like 82 minutes. I think I had written down. So like that's pretty good. Whether it's a goal and or assist, that's kind of what you want out of a target guy, someone who can actually finish pretty consistently, and then also just connect like the whole midfield. Um, and then again, I'd have to really look into the style of play for Penn because that might be a reason why he went on a little bit of a dip. But I got to remind you, not this year, but last year, he was an All American. So I mean, he's been highly regarded for a couple years, and like I said, he's got the frame, he's got the production, and just coming out of the summer with Ballard FC, he wins the USL League Two title, scoring a phenomenal goal in that final. So he can do it at college level. USL 2 level. And if you can do that pretty consistently, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be a believer that at the MLS level, given more, higher coaching, get some better playmakers around him, that he could be, the American version of Shabilko. So that's like where I have him. But again, we've talked about it. I, reluctantly sometimes I'm like a true believer in a lot of these guys. I think that they can do some great things. So yeah, it's just all about what he can develop into. And I think, you know, Tanner's done so much with developing young talent throughout his career. So they definitely picked him and Zach Bohane for a reason. Um, but yeah, that's at least Korsanowski. We
So
can move on to the next one for sure.
yeah, so let's talk about Zach, our friend, or I guess your potential friend, in terms of joining the union, friend to the fans, and obviously someone that potentially me as part of the press would be able to meet at some point. What are your thoughts on him out of Stanford? A much smaller frame than a Stas for sure, but it seems to be a very crafty and thoughtful player in the midfield.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild. I actually had him in the top 20 just based on his productivity. Birth year is a big thing for all of scouting. Like everyone wants to try to find guys as young as they can with the highest trajectory. And I just think he had that like the whole time. And the level of production he had with Stanford, like he was in, like if you went to NCAA's stat list, he was pretty high on both goals and assists. And, stylistically, again, I watched a little bit more of Stanford and sometimes I feel like they were a little bit more scrappy than, I've watched a lot of Wake Forest, so sometimes I use them as a benchmark in terms of like style of play, where they play a really nice, clean, open, connected possession game where you can let the individual guys like really shine. A little bit different for Stanford, so I mean, that's honestly a good thing for when you're judging trajectory because well, if he's able to do that in somewhat of a like I wish I had a better word for it, but chaotic style because there were definitely clean moments, but I mean the guy can finish. He's got great work rate. I mean he's not. Yeah, you don't need him to have that size of Stas because of like his position as more of a roaming playmaker. Um, but he's actually got really great strength. I've seen him tackle really well, like pressing high up the field. So that's a good attribute to have as a more forward, creative midfielder who can also defend high up the pitch. And obviously, he's a good finisher. You give him a little bit of room and he can find the net for you. And then obviously a provider. Um, Free kick specialist. So a lot of his assists come from free kicks. So a guy like let's say 2 years down the road, he could definitely find Stas in the box. So that's pretty exciting. And he'll really force defenders to actually defend. Like he's not just a flair guy who's not, trying to force things to happen. It's like, yeah, he's going to put the ball in the box and really, force those center backs to defend a guy who's, let's again say 2 years down the road, Stas who's going to make their life miserable. And a guy in the league right now that I would say I have kind of thought was maybe, I mean, Eastern Conference, you might not be so familiar with the Western Conference, but Cole Bassett kind of came to mind as somebody who's a little bit lanky, attacking midfielder who can roam wide. But honestly, I think Zach's upside's higher. Like I love Cole. He's a great guy. He's played well. He's kind of returning to form a little bit, but the upside of Zach, I think, is just a lot higher. Just because of that, like he can drift into the wide areas and like serve as a winger. So if you put him as an 8, he can overlap and really get those services in because he can play a great ball. And again, I was thinking maybe they were trying to find a guy who fit a similar profile to Brennan Aronson. Not the exact same, like it'll be kind of a different flavor of that, but you know, work rate, shows up all over the field, really connected in the play. That's that's where I kind of saw him, and it's kind of funny between those two picks, what you can connect to a couple years ago. So I don't know. That's my theory, at least for those guys.
I think the Union faithful would be very happy to have a player that reminds them of a Brendan Aronson, right? In
Yeah,
the golden days, as the Union's trajectory was really changing there, with Shavilko, Aronson, the McKenzies, the trustees, that those days. But let's not forget about our last pick here for the
yeah,
Philadelphia Union, the pick that they made, which was Francesco Montali out of BU, which I must admit, for them to draft a goalkeeper was a bit of a surprise for me. First and foremost, for them to draft anybody was a bit of a surprise, but
yeah.
for them to go for a goalkeeper with their last pick, really, really interesting choice. What do you make of it, or what can you share about Francesco to us?
Yeah, I would say, anyone who watches NCAA, it would be kind of hard to admit that they've tuned in to the Patriot League. So I'm not going to be one of those guys that like, oh yeah, yeah, I've seen him a million times, but I have watched a little bit, since he was picked, and I was prepping to get or to join you here today. But starting off, I think resume wise, he's got everything that you'd want in a draft pick. Two-time conference goalkeeper of the year. So sometimes I feel like these conferences want to shake it up every year to share the love, but to win it back to back for Boston U is pretty good. Good size, 6'3", pretty respectable goals against average, less than a goal a game. And I think when I start to try to find the connections here, because there were so many great goalkeepers in this draft, and a lot of them didn't get drafted, and some of them were like, what happened? And I think that there might have been a connection here a little bit with. I know Tanner didn't do anything with Ernst, or Ernst didn't do anything with New York Red Bulls, but coming from Salzburg, maybe it stuck out that Francesco had some experience with New York Red Bulls Academy, and you know when you come up with some MLS Next academies, I think that was kind of a theme that you saw a little bit. Like if you were ever watching the draft and wondering why some of those names were popping up, even though they weren't household names in NCAA, you could probably see that they were MLS Next Academy guys. So that I think helped a lot. And then you posted his highlight video, and so I watched that, and he has like really good form, and he's really clean with his technique. So diving, collecting, his distribution. And I would say for the listeners, if you imagine yourself coaching a youth goalkeeper, and you're like, all right, we want to show this guy some technique, or this kid some technique, you could give Francesco's tape, because he's that type of guy. He's just got really good form, and he might not have some of like the true acrobatics or the crazy reflexes that some of the other guys might have, but that's kind of rare. And then also, it's just a preference for the goalkeeper coaches, um, and obviously, there's tons of great goalkeepers around the world in the top leagues that have Francesco's style of just truly clean, and real no mistakes from what I see, or um, that's just kind of where I put him. I'm not too surprised. He's got a better profile than some of the other goalkeepers I think that were selected, but yeah, I don't know much about like Union two and the depth within the goalkeeper room for you guys, but um, overall, I'd say he makes sense. It's not like it's a bad pick.
Sure.
Admittedly, I just don't know much about him.
That's okay. And what's interesting is, that what struck me as interesting, I should say, is that Union having Andre Blake, who's obviously an incredible talent across the league, one of the best goalkeepers to ever grace this league, I would argue.
Yeah.
Joe Bendick, not sure what's going on, out of contract, not being renewed by the Union, whether he's retiring or taking his talent somewhere else, who knows? But Trent Holden was dealing with a injury with his thumb that ate up a lot of the minutes that he was supposed to be getting. Therefore, Joe Bendick had to play probably more than they probably envisioned. But then Andrew Rick out in the Union 2, a young guy who has been through the academy, through the system, I think a talent that they also are very high on. So to see a draft, it's just more competition, I suppose, for someone like
Yeah.
Rick. I think that's his name, anyways. Someone who's touted, actually played really well, and I'm really sad to say I should be getting out more if I could, but as a dad of two and everything that I have going on, I wasn't able to make a lot of Union 2 games, but I was there for the Wrexham match. And Mr. Rick had an incredible game against them, right? And that's some good quality opponent that came into town. Never mind the circus that followed.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess now that we're getting to maybe wrap up, and I have a couple of gut check questions. Um, who out of these three is the most first team ready as the Union embark into another grueling season with potentially last year 50 plus games if it repeats itself, 50 games plus all of the competitions over the summer with a rotating cast of players coming and going for international duty? Who do you think is the most ready to step in some role within the first team?
Yeah, I just had to pull up the roster again. I think it's tough. I would have said physically Stas would be up there, but I mean, when you have five center forwards listed, especially with a guy like Carranza, um, it's kind of hard to break into that group.
Mm.
Um,
Who could be sold very, very quickly. The 1st of
yeah,
January is
sure.
coming up very, very fast, and I think a lot of teams in Europe would be interested in him.
Yeah, because I had, especially with that age, and yeah, like so I use transfer market quite a bit to look at these guys, and when that market value starts to creep up, sometimes it makes sense, especially if you can keep reloading and reloading. Um, Pro ready, I know he wasn't drafted, but I mean Nick Periano was brought in for a reason. I think when you talk about a lot of games between all these competitions now, I think him coming in, and we've talked about Peter Stroud for New York Red Bulls before, um, and and yeah, I'm going off board here because he wasn't technically a draft pick, but I think he can help out right now. Because there's questions around Zach Bohane on what he's going to be doing. I think does he go back to Stanford one more year and then join the team? Because I mean, his dad had said, "Oh, we're looking forward to the 2026 season," so I'm not sure what that means. Um, for developmentally, I wish he would stick around. Like maybe he could go to Philadelphia Union too. So I'm not sure what going back to Stanford would really do for him developmentally. But back to Periano, I think true box to box midfielder, and he's really the total package as far as I'm concerned. He just covers a lot of ground. He's aggressive but mindful. He's got just tireless work rate. And I mentioned it before, like when you asked about him. So that my those opinions about his size or anything like that, like oh he's a little slender, that's just stuff that I've like heard from other people because I've always liked Nick, and I'm like, well, if you actually play, he just sticks out. Like if you watched any Duke game this year, it was probably near impossible to not notice Nick because he just popped up everywhere. And physically he can hang with everybody. So I just never understood why that was an opinion.
To be fair, though, Mark, and I'm agreeing with you here. Lucho Costa, league MVP last year, 5'3".
Yeah,
Size does not matter. If you're good enough, you're big enough. If you're good enough, you're old enough. I think that's
yeah,
maybe something where like the American mindset has to change a little bit.
exactly, exactly. And you definitely drove that point home because it is honestly like the American mindset. Because I've always said a foul's a foul. It don't matter if you're 5'3", 140 or 6'5", 200. So yeah, in strength wise, I mean the kid is strong, and he does have a really good quickness, great passing. He's also a set piece taker, like him and Masalis, who just got drafted by Salt Lake. They were always standing over the ball. They can deliver. You put a good target man with like a Jago and Bjornsson up top. He could do that for Union pretty easily. So going into this season, I think he could definitely help the team, coming off the bench and, God forbid any injuries happen. Um, you never know. And I've always said another point to make is when you take some of these guys who are playing with journeymen to really good college players, it's just like a big mix. And this is why the old fashioned scouting, because I hear all the time, well, stats, stats, stats. It's like, no, you actually got to look at how they play within the system because Kamani Stewart Baines, it's like, oh, 3 goals, like what? Well, you actually got to watch them play because Maryland themselves, you know, aren't a world beating team. So I would say, yeah, when you can take Periano, bring him into a group of more consistent players, like Duke's a great team, but more consistency out of the Union guys, just a higher level of professionalism all around. Some guys will just like they'll just hit the next level. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And I think he's definitely one of those guys. He's hungry for sure. Like, I haven't talked to him, but I mean, you could just tell and how he plays. Like, he wants it bad. And yeah, I think he's definitely a bright spot. And that's why I say if you add him in to this draft class, top 5 draft class for the Union.
That's awesome. And as we wrap up here, maybe in a quick 2 minutes or so, what are your thoughts on the overall expansion of the draft right now, allowing younger, I want to say kids, they're not
Yeah.
kids, young adults, the more players to be selected. And I think it was actually something that the league was sort of not showboating, that's not the word, but they were really flashing out that yes, we're expanding the draft. It's going to be
Yeah.
great. It's going to be awesome. We're going to bring more players, give them opportunities. But I think one piece, as my kid's calling for me, one piece that's being lost on people is the fact that, and Aleko, I think his name's Aleko Skandarian, was on the show right before the draft. As soon as a player shows up to, or at least it made it sound this way, I'll play the audio clip over top of this, but as soon as a player shows up to preseason, that's a decision that needs to be calculated because as soon as that happens, eligibility within NCAA is gone. So overall, what are your thoughts on something like that?
Yeah. And I mean, the more room for opportunities, the better, as far as I'm concerned, especially like the ambitions of the guys. Like some of these guys coming into the college world, they have no interest in becoming an engineer one day or anything like that. Their sole aim is to become a professional player. So, based on the ambitions, it's fantastic for those guys, especially if you're a standout freshman. Now that's the only Generation Adidas class. So it frees up a lot of those guys who are sophomores who really have ambitions, like Jacob Merle. It'll be interesting to see what he does because I think he's always probably wanted to be a pro ever since winning um, the high school national player of the year. Like those type of guys I see in this like sophomore class. And again, I'm glad you're going to play the clip for people, and I think it's something that I think we both need to really read the rule book now because yeah, I mean, if it is going to be a big question if the eligibility uh, is foregone. So overall, it's great to see guys more or like available earlier. Um, but yeah, I think it just puts a lot of pressure to make decisions. And for I would say Zach has the he's the clear example. Sophomore, he's got a lot of college left to play if he wanted to. I think that if you brought him into training camp, he's going to sign for the Union. I'd be surprised otherwise. But it's like, all right, in terms how serious is he about wanting to be a pro? I think he should be. Um, but yeah, it's like, do you sign, go to Union to showcase yourself? I think that's where he'd develop more anyway. Because some of these guys, like you just saw, I know it's a little bit different, but Charlie Sharp gets drafted last year, comes back to Western Michigan, kicks the crap out of everybody, and ends up a Mac Herman finalist. And it's like there will be a point where you're just playing for fun, kind of. So and you
Man,
just
man
need a
amongst
spot.
boys type of situation,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So I know he'd probably have like another year of a really good year at Stanford, but yeah, developmentally, I'm not sure what that would mean long term. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. And yeah, for some of the rest of the guys, like today, I already started seeing some of the guys that got drafted are signing to USL championship teams. So I'm not sure what the conversations are. And I didn't even see what year they were like or any of those details yet. But yeah, it'll be an interesting next few weeks between all of the guys that did get drafted and then especially all the guys that didn't get drafted to see where they all end up. Because, I mean, like I've said multiple times, this has got to be the deepest draft class in MLS draft history. And it's probably only going to get better. And that's probably my last comment is again, just not to bang the NCAA and USL League Two war drum, but if you're around any program or team that's um, pretty fun to watch, I just when you're around it, it'll start making more sense for any of the fans out there who have yet to really connect themselves with the younger group. But yeah,
No, that's awesome. That's super helpful. And, as I continue to think about depth, any South American college student who represents at the under 23 level will be embarking to potentially play in the pre Olympic tournament to decide who goes to the Olympics, never mind getting into Paris 2024 and everything in between. So a lot of really interesting pieces and we'll continue to keep you hopefully Mark as soon as the phone rings you're willing to chat some more, willing to collaborate some more because this has been enlightening, right? I never envisioned the Union continuing to select from the draft, so to
yeah.
have you as sort of a crutch in a way to get some information and get some perspective has been super super helpful. But everybody, if you're not, I will make sure that you do so. But Mark Kelkenberg, incredible brain in terms of the collegiate angle of soccer, developmental, everything. Make sure you give him a follow. Mark, anything you want to plug before we get off?
Uh, Not really. I would say there there's a really great. I mean, if you're bored in this the off season and you're interested in getting to know some of these players more, he didn't ask me to plug him, but it just came across my mind when I was like leading up to here. But there's a kick a ball podcast, kick a ball pod on Instagram. I think they do tons of interviews with these college guys. If you want to get to know them a little bit more, um, they do some really good work as well. But yeah, they didn't ask me to say that. I just felt like, since we're talking a lot about college players, they wouldn't mind a good shout out. So
No worries. I was just talking to two players, Amobi Akugo and Tesha Kindele earlier this week, and
yeah,
I think we might have spent maybe 6 minutes talking about Wasserman and why the two agents that they used were so great. And then at the end, I'm just like, I probably should put a clarification that this is not sponsored by
no,
Wasserman
no,
in
no,
any
yeah,
way, shape, or form. So no, Mark, again, thank you so much. Friend of the podcast, friend of mine now for sure.
yeah,
I hope
definitely.
to at some point. I'm planning on going to Charlotte when the Union are there. But besides that, some work travel that I do out there, will certainly reach out and hopefully share a
Yep.
drink or just get to see you in person. But for
Yeah.
now, everybody, make sure you follow Mark, and we'll see what happens. Union preseason just around the corner, and a lot to happen very, very quickly. So everybody have a great night, and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.